So why don't we get started? And I want to give Dr. Kim time to share his work as well as have time for Q&A. So welcome everyone. And Julie told me that this is our last career development seminar series for this year. So I'm really excited that we were able to get Dr. Andrew Kim's time today to share his work. So before we begin, let me just say a few words about his work and then we can get started. Okay, I'm getting old, my eyesights are failing me, so bear with me. So Andrew Wooyoung Kim, or Andy Kim, is a biological anthropologist interested in the life course and intergenerational health consequences of historical trauma and the contribution of such knowledge to movements for collective healing and racial justice. Dr. Kim's current research traces the stress physiological mechanisms underlying the intergeneration effects of trauma and political violence from apartheid, as well as processes of reversibility and healing in Soweto and Johannesburg, South Africa. His work explores these questions in collaboration with a 30-year project called Birth to 30, a birth cohort study based in Soweto and Johannesburg, South Africa, that enrolled over 3,000 pregnant women during the dissolution of the apartheid regime and has since documented the lives of these families across multiple generations. This is like fascinating. So his secondary research combines ethnographic and epidemiological research to examine the lived experience of psychiatric patients and healthcare workers, population mental health trends, and solutions for improving public mental health, public mental health care systems in post-colonial and marginalized settings. So it is my privilege and honor to introduce our speaker today. And as before, Andy, if you want to present, I would say for about like 40 minutes or so, or 45 minutes. And then we can have space for reflections and questions. So welcome and look forward to hearing your talk.
Great, thanks so much. And can you hear me? Okay,
Yeah, yeah.
cool, fantastic. Great. Thanks so much for the wonderful introduction. My name is Andy Kim. I'm assistant professor of biological anthropology here at UC Berkeley, which is where I'm speaking to you all from, and also have an honorary appointment at the Faculty of Health Sciences at the University of the Witwatersrand in Johannesburg, South Africa, which is where all my research is based and where I've been working um, since before my time in Fogarty and, of course, during my Fogarty Fellowship. I completed my Fogarty in 2019 to 2020, which, as you can imagine, was an interesting time to be doing global health research and on a training fellowship, actually one of the most formative experiences during my research uh, development. I'm happy to speak more about that. Yeah, thanks so much for having me, and you'll hear a little bit more about me just right now. As I mentioned, I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Anthropology at UC Berkeley. I'm fairly new, just ended my second year on the tenure track here at Cal. Um, in this presentation, I'll go a little bit through my background to how I got into global health research, I'll share a little bit about my work, and then, of course, share most of the time, or spend most of the time sharing a few reflections that I have that I've been tasked to speak about with regards to my research trajectory, obtaining funding, and making the most out of your Fogarty Fellowship. And then, of course, in leaving time for question and answers. So I started out doing my undergraduate at Emory University in a very similar discipline in anthropology and human biology. I was interested in becoming a doctor, but became really interested in social science perspectives on health and well-being, particularly around questions of global mental health. Before entering my PhD, I worked in health policy research, both in DC and in Denver. I'm doing a lot of community-based research on health inequities, as well as different health policy research on different marginalized groups, specifically farm workers and other immigrants. And then eventually decided to enter a PhD to deepen my experience in social science research and applied health science research. Of course, becoming interested in anthropological perspectives on health and well-being, which is what brought me to my degree at Northwestern. And afterwards, I completed a postdoc in psychiatric epidemiology at Mass Gen at Harvard Medical School with my advisor that I actually met during my Fogarty Fellowship, Dr. Alexander Sai, Alex Sai, at Center for Global Health at MGH. And then from there, I transitioned to Berkeley in the beginning of 2022. So you're probably wondering why there's like two fruit flies fighting, if this is actually relevant to my pathway, but became really interested in understanding um, our interactions between social and biological factors and how they shape who we are as humans. I became involved in research. Um, I grew up in a college town in Athens, Georgia, where the University of Georgia is, and became involved in research in a Drosophila lab that was interested in looking at different social pathways to neurobiological function and health. And during my time as as a student working in this lab, I became really fascinated by the idea that both genetics and social experience could have really impactful experiences on the development and neurobiological function of even such simple creatures as simple as fruit flies, which we actually know are not so simple. So in this work, we found really profound impacts on the lack of social experience on altering aggression and brain development in fruit flies. And I thought, how could these interactions between biology and social factors, but also, in a much more complex and politicized world that we live in as humans, alter not only human health, but the distribution of human health inequities, both in the United States and across the world. This is a time when questions about the interaction between nature and nurture were coming into the fore, especially because of increasing interest in new genetic technologies that led us to understand more about how different social experiences could affect us. Things like gene by environment interactions, and of course, the rising world of epigenetics, or the field of study of how different social and environmental experiences could affect gene expression and have long-term impacts on health outcomes. I also became really interested in thinking about how these dynamics of or interactions between biology and society, biology and culture, could also be used to perpetuate such different types of negative stereotypes or understandings of especially marginalized populations, those that may be considered to have, genetic risk factors for, let's say, like delinquent crimes or violent behavior, and also how different cultural and social dynamics could racialize individuals to place them at worse social situations, potentially even leading to these eugenic understandings of health inequities and of people's biologies and health. So I knew that there was some sort of really interesting area of work that could be done around the interaction between biology and society, biology and social experience, and the applications to health inequities. I brought these interests to college. I went to Emory University in Atlanta, also has a fantastic global health program in the School of Public Health and Medicine that many of you may be aware of. And it was at Emory where I really dug my teeth into research on the rising wave of interest in epigenetics. I became interested and worked in a lab, a psychiatric epigenetics lab, that was looking at how different social experiences, social conditions, everything from drug use to substance use to different psychiatric risk exposures could alter the underlying epigenetic code and have downstream impacts on psychiatric outcomes. Um, and also thinking about how these experiences could potentially be intergenerationally transmitted, such as the intergenerational transmission of different social experiences like trauma, and different social transmission of, or different pathways of transmission of psychiatric illness like depression or PTSD. Um, I became interested in the biological aspects of this, but wanted to understand where these samples were coming from, what were the lived experiences of these individuals who are providing us their epigenetic information, and what were the broader social and political contexts that were altering their epigenetic code, which led me to do work in a large clinical study on the intergenerational transmission of PTSD risk at Grady Hospital, which is a large um, public hospital in Atlanta. And it was then when I started talking to individuals about their lived experience in highly politicized and racialized settings, and especially areas that were high crime, high violence in different parts of Atlanta, that really made me understand how different types of racial violence, political violence that were affecting different communities of color in Atlanta had not just deep social and health implications, but also potentially had these downstream impacts on their biology that could possibly manifest the past exposures to different types of structural violence across generations. Made me really interested in different aspects, the different social, political aspects of mental health. Brought me to conduct my first bout of international fieldwork in Haiti, where I worked with an anthropology PhD student who was doing work with partners in health and different universities in um, the Central Plateau of Haiti to understand different social and political dynamics of mental health in the area, which was really a profound experience for me, and brought me to develop my own interest in understanding how different social, political, and biological dynamics could manifest intergenerationally. And of course, this became quite a personal thing for me as well, given my background as a Korean American. My family emigrated from the United States to SoCal, then to New York, and then to Georgia. And through their own experience with immigration and my family's experience with overcoming Japanese colonization and war, I became interested in understanding how these different historical events of trauma and political violence, colonization as a whole, could continue to live in the body. And how did people contend with that, overcome these historical legacies, and understand what these different biological and health outcomes are as a result of historical trauma and violence. This, of course, became quite important in the present day, especially different movements such as Black Lives Matter, Stop Double, different types of, especially movements for racial justice that were specifically contending with these histories of political violence and colonization that continue to affect descended communities in the present day. And of course, this brings me to my a strand of my larger interest areas of work, which think about not only the intergenerational transmission of stress and trauma on biology and health, but also its contributions to current movements for restorative transitional justice, and thinking about how these two areas of work can be combined to understand processes of intergenerational healing. So I bring this work to Johannesburg, South Africa, where I became interested in college on the legacies of racial violence, how different forms of state and political violence that perpetuated various forms of racism um, on a very large level was impacting individuals' health and well-being, but population health trends as a whole. And became interested in understanding through a collaboration with my current collaborators, research collaborators now, that I've worked with since the time of my PhD, how embodied effects of stress and trauma during the dissolution of the apartheid regime between 1990 leading up to the dissolution of the apartheid government in 1994 could have impacts um, developing mothers, on mothers with developing children who were pregnant at the time. So mothers who were pregnant at the time, how different exposures to various forms of political violence could affect the developing fetus and potentially manifest into how those effects could potentially manifest into the present day across their own life course and potentially intergenerationally. So what were these intergenerational effects of political violence and trauma during the dissolution of the apartheid regime um, on subsequent generations, which is the research question that brings me to my current research now and my current body of work here at UC Berkeley and at WITS. I collaborate with a large longitudinal birth cohort study that I'll speak about in just a second, but just to give you an overview of what my research program focuses here at Berkeley, I asked three major questions. How does historical trauma affect the health of future generations? What are the developmental biological mechanisms of intergenerational trauma? And how can we undo these legacies of historical trauma and promote generational healing? So as both someone that's trained in human biology and the social sciences, one reason why I became really interested in pursuing an anthropological perspective and understanding global health issues was because of the interdisciplinary nature, the ability for me to draw on various different paradigms and understandings of the social world and the body and biology to think about different pathways of racial health of the production of racial health disparities as well as pathways to racial health equity. So I think about work around race and coloniality, the anthropology of race, trauma, and health, theoretical understandings of interactions between biology and society or biology and culture, and developmental and biological frameworks such as the developmental origins of health and disease, which contribute to our broader understandings of life course epidemiology, to understand these interactions between society, biology, and politics, and the production of mental health disparities as well. So this is the study that I collaborate with called Birth to 30, or colloquially known as Mandela's Children. This is a longitudinal birth cohort study that I've been working with since the beginning of my PhD and was the site of my Fogarty Fellowship. I was part of the HBNU consortium as a PhD candidate during my third year of my PhD. Third year going to my fourth year of my PhD. And a little bit about Birth to 30. Birth to 30 is the largest and longest running study of child health in the African continent, which initially aimed to assess the impact of societal change that came as a result of apartheid. There was a lot of movement in different regions of not only Johannesburg, but different parts of the country due to racial planning and the movements of different racial groups in the city in support of racial capitalism during the apartheid regime. The research planners at the time were really interested in understanding how these changing social environments were potentially impacting the health and well-being of children at the time. Over time, Birth to 30 initially started as a multiracial sample that aimed to be representative of the city. But over time, especially due to the fact that Birth to 30 was based in a very major and politically significant, what eventually became to be a very politically significant area and township called Soweto, which was a predominantly Black African township due to racial planning policies from the apartheid government. And because the study continued to be based there at a large hospital called Baragwanath Hospital, the study eventually decided to focus on Black African individuals, which is the folks who make up the study now. And as a whole, this is the only longitudinal study to examine the impacts of prenatal stress during apartheid, which became one of the main reasons why I decided to collaborate with this team, who are also interested in similar research questions on intergenerational trauma. So I won't go too much into the body of my research, but just to give you some high-level overviews of some of the work that I've been working on that actually come as a result of my Fogarty Fellowship, which allowed me a lot of time for data collection and for field work and even data analysis. As a whole, the primary work that I've been doing with Birth to 30 is to understand different intergenerational effects of stress exposure that women face during gestation or during pregnancy, and how these exposures of prenatal stress to the apartheid regime or violence during the apartheid government could potentially had impacts on different stages of the life course of the next generation, starting as early as prenatal, as birth, then looking at impacts on psychiatric risk later in adolescence, 18 years after birth, and then starting to understand underlying mechanisms of stress physiological dysregulation that come as a result of trauma exposure during gestation that could potentially have long-term and lingering effects in the individual and potentially into the next generation. So some of what my research has found is that prenatal stress during the apartheid regime corresponded with lower birth weights in females in the first study, that there were specific mechanisms of stress physiological dysregulation coming from stress mechanisms of stress sensitivity, psychological stress sensitivity among those who had increased levels of stress exposure both during prenatal development and later in their lives, and a possible underlying process of neuroinflammation that comes as a result of prenatal stress exposure during gestation, which may be contributing to increased levels of late adolescent psychiatric risk. And then some very recent evidence that has shown that the impacts of maternal prenatal stress during gestation may linger into the next generation as far as 28 years later into the life course of the next generation. Which are data that I'm currently writing up for publication. So this is just a small collection of data that show possible effects of intergenerational trauma transmission in the sample due to exposure to violence from the apartheid regime. And other work that's being conducted alongside this is really starting to understand these potential pathways for healing and the amelioration of these embodied effects of developmental trauma, both during gestation, but also due to childhood experience or adversity. And thinking about different socially and culturally relevant mechanisms of healing that can be utilized to potentially scale up as interventions or social programs. So just to shift, I wanted to highlight the importance of the Fogarty Fellowship and my trajectory. As I mentioned before, the Fogarty Fellowship was one of the main reasons as to how I was able to conduct this research. This included, of course, a year of salary support to be in the field, research funds to support my work, as well as the opportunity to connect with a very large range of different like-minded researchers who were really instrumental in supporting my time in not only in South Africa, but also during the middle of a pandemic. I opted to stay in my field site when COVID hit. I was just deep in the middle of conducting my study on intergenerational trauma, and saw that there was a lot of psychological morbidity, increased psychological morbidity that came as a result of the impacts of the pandemic as well as the pandemic itself. And especially given the limited public mental health infrastructure and NGO infrastructure for mental health support, and the opportunities we had to provide support for participants in our study, which were quite numerous. I felt that it was quite important, almost had an ethical imperative to work with my team to eventually convert our study into a psychological surveillance program to identify elevated levels of psychiatric risk and assist those in our study to not only provide mental health resources for themselves, but also their family members. And we eventually developed this system in coordination with local hospital systems and NGOs to support, to provide public mental health assistance to those in our study, but also provide almost like a catchment platform to respond to active mental health crises or experiences as a result of the pandemic. This also fed into the research and became a really important part of the research study, and we were able to really start capturing the early mental health impacts of the pandemic and the effects of infection, especially on the long-term impacts of post-viral outcomes from COVID-19 or from SARS-CoV-2. And that's actually manifested into a collaboration that I'm currently working on now, which looks at the psychiatric sequelae of long COVID in a new research group, also based at WITS. So the Fogarty Fellowship has really provided me a number of different opportunities to not only continue my research, but also develop new research programs and collaborations with different key players in South Africa and across the world. So I'm happy to talk more about my Fogarty experience, but I'm going to share some of my reflections that come as a result of my time in Fogarty. Cool. So I just wanted to, there's so many things to talk about. So I thought about limiting the reflections I wanted to share just in 4 different points or 4 different lessons. And again, I'm very happy to keep this casual. You can stop me at any time and we can have this more as a conversation. Of course, we can spend time during the Q&A to talk more about this then. But the first lesson I wanted to speak about was around developing your post-Fogarty plan now. So many of you will complete your Fogarty Fellowship within a year. Some of you all may take a little more time and extend it to a second year. But regardless, the academic job market continues on and takes quite a long time for your application to process. And some of you may already have submitted applications, most likely in the past, just even right when your fellowship had started. So for those who haven't started, or for those who are assisting those who may be starting the Fogarty fellowships quite soon, it's really important to think about your post-Fogarty plan as soon as possible, just because of the timing of the academic job market. This could mean a lot of different things, depending on where you are in your career stage, whether you're also a PhD candidate like I was, when I was in Fogarty, or transitioning into a postdoc or while in a postdoc, or a research scientist position. A couple of things I want to mention. I think it's important for you to, of course, prioritize the data you need for your project, and be sure to prioritize the data that you want to obtain from Fogarty before engaging in maybe other collaborations or other research projects, just to ensure that you have a strong body of primary data or secondary data that you need for your next career stage. It's unlikely for you to not only for you to both conduct data collection, but also analyze it, within the span of 9 months to a year. So for those who are doing primary data collection or obtaining data from your fellowship, really prioritize the main aspect of your project so that you have strong either pilot data or study data that you can continue on with for the next several years. The data that I've collected during my Fogarty has still continued to be used. I actually haven't analyzed like a majority of it, which I'm finding is common. But yeah, so stay committed to collecting this data. Don't be afraid to use your no-cost extension. I'm sure this is something that others have already offered. Um, it's, there's absolutely no penalty that comes with it. Gives you a lot more flexibility. And during this time, I think it's quite important to start beginning networking and conducting informational interviews with other colleagues and mentors to start thinking about what your next step could be. I think being in the Fogarty Fellowship provides you an access to a wealth of knowledge and active mentors. And these mentors are harder to connect with once you leave the fellowship. So while you're in the fellowship, I think it really behooves you to take advantage of your status, reaching out to not only maybe faculty in your consortia, but other consortia. And those individuals, maybe being more likely to connect you to other individuals who could be more relevant to you as you continue on with your career. And I'm actually going to talk about this last point in the next lesson, which will be around identifying strong mentors. So I know this is something that's been discussed in, I'm pretty sure the past two um, career development talks, well, those that are similar to ones that I'm currently presenting now. But I can't emphasize this enough. Finding a small handful of mentors, not just at one, but multiple, as you have many different parts of your research that also need development. Finding it's really important to find a small network of mentors who can usher you to the transition to research independence and beyond. I can very confidently say that everyone who will potentially be mentoring you or who you work with who are senior to you have also benefited from strong mentorship. And it's, I can at least speak for myself, and just based on what I've seen during my time uh, from PhD to my current position now, that mentors who have had really positive experiences through receiving mentoring will also want to provide their own mentorship. So it's there are lots of mentors out there who really want to actively work with bright, ambitious, and strong research trainees who are also going through this process of transitioning to research independence. So I've actually found it quite easy to find a number of mentors who are interested in supporting you to different parts of that process. But of course, mentorship is a two-way street. It's not just something that is unilateral. It's something that requires efforts on both ends. And I think there are a number of different components to your role as a mentee to ensure that you're receiving quality mentorship. And I've listed some of these components here. First is to be really clear about your goals. I don't think it's important for you. I think it's of course important for you to state these mentors, but in an ineffective process for you to go about finding a mentor without being clear about what you need. Is it a mentor for grant development? Is it a mentor for analyzing certain types of data? Is it a mentor for transitioning you through from postdoc to a faculty position? Are there specific skills that you want? And I think the more specific you are, the more clear about what you need assistance with, the more the mentor will be able to assist you and provide not only guided mentorship, but also identify other people who could be more relevant for you. So being clear about what you need, conducting informational interviews with mentors who are willing to speak with you. For those who may not necessarily have current mentors and at the present, but I think this is a practice that will serve you across your career. Speaking to individuals who share common interests, and this being sort of an ongoing practice for you to not only to expand your network uh, and and I guess expand the impact of your work as well. But for those who may not necessarily have active mentors at the moment, conducting these informational interviews is quite key. And I have a little activity that I want to show you in terms of how to identify potential individuals that may be most effective. Um, I've mentioned this before, but identifying individuals in the Fogarty network is key, especially those, especially during your time as a Fogarty Fellow. Those individuals in the Fogarty network may be more likely to respond to you during this time. And of course, having everything ready so that once you make your pitch, it's easy for the mentor to understand who you are, what your background is, what you need, and how you could be mentored most effectively. So I think, at least when I was a Fogarty Fellow, we had trainings on each of these work products that I'm encouraging you always to share: an elevator pitch, developing your CV or resume, identifying different work products that can be relevant for your future, whether it's a grant application or a publication. Um, and the last thing I want to say here is that developing a collaboration with a mentor could be one of the best ways for you to expose yourself, especially if it's the barrier to entry to speaking to that mentor or working with that mentor is quite high. And starting small is okay, whether it's as small as, being a very, very, last co-author, maybe not the last co-author, but somewhere in the middle on a paper, assisting with different research by maybe speaking to other trainees that assist the mentor that you're trying to get in touch with. Many different strategies for you to identify different mentors. So this is just a quick mentoring networking tool that I've utilized in a number of different contexts that I think have proved to be helpful for other folks who are going through the networking process. And I divide this tool into three parts. The first being skills, so skills that you may want to obtain that you don't have now. The second being people that you may want to contact because they have particular areas of work that you're interested in, or maybe other reasons that you want to connect with them. And then perhaps the location of maybe where you want to be, research where you find to be really exciting, or maybe where these people are located. So this tool is designed for individuals who don't necessarily know who to start speaking to, or really just to refine your networking process so that you're maximizing your time and energy and making this process most efficient. So in this tool, I encourage individuals to think about, of course, which part is most important. Usually the skills are most important for individuals, and for folks to identify which skill they want to build the most. So let's say I really wanted to build the skill of working with longitudinal birth cohort studies, as I potentially want to, maybe build my expertise in working in this type of research platform and design. I encourage those people working with this tool to then connect the dots, start drawing lines with people who've worked with different birth cohort studies, different researchers who have this experience, and then connecting this with maybe locations of where major birth cohort studies exist, and where these people are located. And I do the same thing for each of these skills: multi-level modeling, lab work, strong work or fundraising. And as a result, you have this complete mess of lines pointing, connecting skills, peoples, and locations. But over time, you'll see that these lines congregate towards different individuals and locations. And the areas that have the most lines connected to other aspects of this table, skills or location, are those that you want to start with during your networking process. These are those that will probably allow you to get the best bang for your buck. Those that are probably going to be most relevant to the skill set that you're interested you're interested in seeking, and also can potentially maybe help you identify locations that could be relevant for your next career step. Maybe you already have this in mind, but again, this networking tool is really designed for those who are really interested in seeking out networking opportunities, but not necessarily know how to start, or could also be used for those who've already networked before or have experience in networking before, but I really want to refine their process and be really targeted in their approach to identifying new people. You may be surprised that some of these arrows could connect to people that you may not think are actually those who could be relevant for your research career. So the next lesson's around developing a strong core application. This lesson's more around fundraising. I've, as an assistant professor, been really on the prowl, of course, for grant funding, and I found that during my time, from during my PhD, my postdoc, and as an early career researcher, that there are a number of different strategies that we are encouraged to take. And I think the single approach that's really worked for me is to develop a very strong core application and then building off of that core application rather than trying to apply for different grant opportunities that may be low-hanging fruit for a variety of different reasons. Maybe it's an easy application, maybe it's a funder that you have a relationship with, maybe it's something that is just exciting to you. You're going to have a ton of different opportunities that come your way. In the midst of all these different opportunities, deadlines, responsibilities, I found that really just working off of one strong core application and making small adjustments to this core application has been successful for me. So of course, what goes into this, identifying a novel and timely research question that you think will be competitive, workshopping the application with a team of outside readers. So once you have a strong application drafted, either convening a team of folks to read your application, provide you feedback, or working with each of them individually. And of course, submitting these proposals to opportunities that have the large pots of funding, but then also identifying different parts of that application that you can tinker with, you can adapt to submit to these smaller opportunities that you may think are also helpful as well. So a lot of my early work was supported by different pots of smaller grant funding that eventually came together. And this last point is one that I really want to emphasize the most. Going through this process, also, let's say you get your grants funded, going through this process allows you to minimize the amount of administrative work needed to fulfill the obligations for your grant. So rather than doing administrative work for maybe 4 different projects that have various different types of data that you're collecting, survey data, interview data, biological data, DNA, which all come with their own administrative hurdles, minimizing and centralizing the amount of administrative work needed to conduct these grants will really save you time in the long run. I'm sure Jay and other researchers can speak to this, but there's so much administrative work that comes along with conducting overseeing grants and conducting research that a large part of the grant isn't even research itself. It's compliance, it's IRB, it's negotiating legal contracts between your institution and the host institution, and really trying to identify ways to streamline that administrative work is, I think, quite crucial. So this is just one example of how I was able to make this work. I wrote a core application for the National Science Foundation, which is funded on intergenerational trauma in South Africa. I was able to adapt this application and submit it to a number of different foundations and funding agencies. I've only listed like a portion of those here. And I was pretty successful in most of them, all except for the K Award, which unfortunately didn't work out, but I was able to amass a large pot of funding from a number of different research institutions, all using the same project. And some organizations allow you to, use the same research question that's previously been funded. Others require you to, of course, provide some alterations so that there's not super overlapping material, but overall, it's been a very fruitful experience for me, and is the same approach that I'm going to take for my ongoing research on long COVID. And the last is just around preparing for the academic job market. This is something we can talk about in the Q&A just in the interest of time, but I'm happy to speak more about my experience transitioning to research independence into my faculty position, which is a hard money position. But just looping back to my first point where talking about timing really does matter, and starting it really behooves you to start early. I just have a timeline here of my time on the job market while on the Fogarty Fellowship. I took a no-cost extension and completed my fellowship in about 2 years. My fellowship started in 2019. And near the end of my fellowship is when I started looking at jobs and entering the job market. So this entire timeline is intertwined with my time in the Fogarty Fellowship. So I was on the job market at the same time as conducting my research. And I would not have been able to, apply for different tenure track positions or postdocs without having prepared, without having prepared a lot of my job materials, or even doing a lot of this background work to enter the market. I, I guess I wouldn't been able to do this without doing some level of preparation during my Fogarty fellowship. So this is very much a parallel process. And for some of you now, you may already be conducting this process now. Yeah, behoove you to start early, especially when it comes to just even thinking about what positions you want. Do you want a hard money or soft money position? Where you want to be? Drafting a strong cover letter. Starting early really matters. Cool. So I'll stop there in the interest of time. Thanks so much for having me, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you so much, Andy. This was really great, and I really appreciate the practical, suggestions and advice that you have provided. Feel free to type in your questions in the chat, or you can unmute and ask questions. So I have a few, but I want to make sure that our trainees have time to, seek your guidance. So, any immediate questions for Dr. Kim? You were crystal clear, so no questions. Yeah, so as you process the work that Dr. Kim has shared, please, feel free to type in the chat. We still have some time. So I have oh, there it is. Okay, so let's go with this one.
Cool.
Okay.
Yeah. So I
Yep.
have a comment. This is practical. How are you dealing with the NIH KO1 setback? Great question. So I submitted my KO1 when I was a postdoc at Harvard. I received comments that were definitely addressable, but decided ultimately not to resubmit because of the transition I was making to Berkeley. I had found out that I obtained my tenure track position and was going to move institutions. I think right after I received my comments from the review committee, and really the main reason why I didn't submit was because of the administrative complications that came with transitioning my KO1 application from MGH to Berkeley. A lot of the training plan and research to a certain degree is really specific to the institution that you want to work at. So different classes, mentors that you want to work with, maybe different opportunities for you to engage in different training programs are all school specific. And I had to completely redesign my especially my training plan at my K. So I decided to hold off on resubmitting my K until I transitioned to Berkeley and saw who was available to serve as a team of mentors. Ultimately, I actually decided that the project I pitched was one that could not be adequately supported by the different researchers I had available at Berkeley, and I'm also sort of taking a different approach. I'm wanting to work with a team of researchers that already have an existing research platform, and I'm thinking about working off of that research platform to either submit a K or just go for an R. Yeah, I think having a certain degree of flexibility
Mhm.
is important, as your life circumstances may change as well during the process of resubmission. But had I stayed at MGH, I definitely would have worked on my resubmission and probably got it in the next review cycle. And this is a very common occurrence. So I would expect, I would encourage a lot of you to just set your expectations so that you factor in enough time to address a set of comments before hopefully you get your K.
Yeah, yeah, I agree, and I think just to build off Dr. Kim's point about, so application to a career development award, you might think this is a setback, but at the same time, as Andy mentioned, it's important to really be honest about your career path and, be courageous to like just, pivot and make changes to your plan. So it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a failure. It's just another lesson that you benefit from the experience. And I think the example that Andy gave about transitioning to UC Berkeley and finding the mentors to see whether the KO1 is a viable option and having the autonomy and courage to say, okay, so that's not going to work, but I'm going to pivot and do other career trajectories. So I think that's perfectly fine, and um,
Yeah,
it's a good lesson.
definitely. Yeah, and I think for a lot of us on this process, this is not the only opportunity we have um, in, I guess, in the works.
Mhm.
This is something that you're probably comparing against other career development awards or other positions that you might be entering. And I would encourage, a lot of you all to diversify the opportunities that you're wanting to seek so that it's not just all eggs in one basket on the KO1. Again, as I mentioned before, the KO1 can be converted into a lot of different applications. And there are, especially during the early career stage, probably the time where there's the most number of opportunities for you all to get this type of career support.
Yeah.
So this is another question here from Merlin. Thanks for your question. Do you recommend that researchers should continue building their GloCal research topic and apply for future grants? Would it be fine to pivot? I think it's totally fine to pivot. It really depends on what areas of research you're interested in pursuing, how successful your Fogarty project is. Of course, there's lots of complications when it comes to field work, and really what opportunities um, are coming up for you. I think without knowing too much about the specifics of your context, I think you know avoiding, if at all possible, um, the I guess, yeah, trying to streamline your research is really important. If you really try to diversify your research and develop, um, too many different interests, then it really takes away time from really building in and developing one strong area of work. And putting yourself sort of at the next tier of scientific rigor and quality when it comes. And of course, grading grants is a difficult process for anyone. So I think that's one thing just to keep in mind, especially if you were to pivot to a new topic, perhaps, using the research experience that you've had from GloCal to inform that new topic, or maybe trying to find a way where that topic weaves into the new topic that you want to develop as a new area of work. All this also supports you as a candidate, and when you're possibly explaining how your own research background has prepared you to um, be competitive, or to um, you know position you in a good position you to successfully complete a particular grant. Grant agencies are also interested in knowing that the project you're pitching is feasible, and if you pitch a new project, then it might not seem as feasible as well. Um, and then I'll take this last question.
Sure.
Talking about flexibility, what's your take on changing research focus areas at this point, or for fellows that may be thinking of going to an area different from the GloCal project? Very similar to the other question.
Mm,
I think there are going to be a lot of opportunities that come your way, especially if you want to keep a sense of research identity, which I think is quite important at this stage. You know, want to think about how do I want to um, sell myself on the job market, or communicate my interests or my skill set to the world, and my contributions to the scientific community broadly. If you have too many interests, then it's going to be hard for people to, you know, sort of pin you down and think, oh, what does this person do? What's our area of expertise? Even if you're still rather junior. And developing that area of work is really just also important to cultivate your research identity.
yeah.
So a number of different things to take into consideration. I wouldn't say that having different research projects, running different research projects at the same time is necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes it's circumstantial. Maybe you get brought into another project. Maybe there's a new grant opportunity that just sort of falls in your lap, which is awesome. And it's important to be flexible to take on those projects. But at a certain point, I think it'll become too infeasible, and just in order to, you know, save your time and energy, I think trying to prioritize is always important.
Yeah. So yeah, definitely I definitely agree. And Andy, I hope it's okay if I let the trainees know that they can contact you offline if they have any additional questions. We are at time, so this was really amazing. And yeah, personally, I would love to, maybe we can have like a virtual coffee
Yeah,
and so I
anytime.
can learn more about, yeah, I'm really interested in like how you are kind of transferring the work that you're doing in South Africa and like currently, you know, at UC Berkeley, and maybe we can find opportunities to collaborate as well.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. Great.
perfect. All right. Well, thank you all for your attention and congrats on attending the last session of the Career Development Seminar. And I believe you have one more works in progress coming up. So appreciate all of you. And thank you, Andy, for your time.
Thank
So,
you so much.
all right. Take care, everyone.
Goodbye.